Hello and welcome to Quarantini Day 9. Today begins a new tradition on Quarantini. I know a lot of people have been missing my Sips of History from Facebook and Instagram, so from now on, at the beginning of my videos, I will be doing a Today in LGBTQ plus history. So today is March 30th, and exactly 62 years ago, on March 30th, 1958, a 27-year-old dancer and choreographer named Alvin Ailey stepped on the stage of the 92nd Street Y in New York City. He was a closeted black man, and Ailey was joined on stage by a small group of other black dancers. And with that performance, which fused blues music, ballet, the theater of daily life, Ailey initiated a new era in American dance. And his Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, which is dedicated to protecting and promoting the African American cultural experience, grew to perform in front of over 21 million people on 6 different continents. Unfortunately, at the age of 58 in 1989, Ailey died from complications due to AIDS. In 2014, President Barack Obama posthumously awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So that was our very first sip of history, and tonight, pour one out for Alvin Ailey, truly a dance icon. Before we move on to Giovanni's Room, I wanted to take time to thank Sarah Prager, who is the creator of an app called Quist, which gives you a little tidbit of LGBTQ plus history each day, and it's my inspiration and also my source for these sips of history. So if you'd like your own sips of history on your phone, just check out the link to Quist on my website at quarantini.lgbt. So, Giovanni's Room, Part 2, Chapter 2. Let's start with a bit of a recap. We begin with a description of Giovanni's tiny dirty room in which David is staying for a few months. And David is speculating that Giovanni's room is a mess. It's in such bad shape because Giovanni is punishing himself. Maybe he's grieving. And David decides that it's his job to come and give Giovanni a new and better life, as he calls it. And while Giovanni is at work, David begins cleaning the room. And during this time, David is swinging back and forth, deciding whether or not he's actually in love with Giovanni. When Giovanni touches him, he thinks it doesn't matter. It is only the body. It will soon be over, as he puts it. He claims he's not really in love with another man. It's just physical. And then Giovanni goes to the American Express office in Paris and picks up his mail from home. And his father writes him, reminding his son that he is as American as pork and beans. It's time to come home. And he also refuses to give his son any money at all. And David puts away the letter and sees a sailor walking down the street. And David unintentionally stares at him. And he says my favorite line in any book ever. He made me think of home. Perhaps home is not a place, but simply an irrevocable condition. And David and the sailor make eye contact, and the sailor looks at David with a contemptuously lewd and knowing look. And David starts to feel ashamed. He says, I know what the sailor had seen in my unguarded eyes was envy and desire, he says. It's the same look that Jacques often gave David, and he realizes that. Anyway, David then opens a letter from Hella, who is enjoying Spain, but says she prefers Paris. She announces that she'll be back in just 10 days. But after her letter, as David is walking down the street, he's not thinking of Hella's face, of his fiance's face, he's thinking of Giovanni's. And he decides in that moment, after that realization, that he wants to go find a girl. So he sits down at a bar and finally sees an acquaintance, a blonde and rather puffy girl named Sue. And David knows he's being cruel. He is not being a good guy here. But he still propositions her. She at first doesn't want to have him over, and he keeps pushing it, and she eventually agrees. So, pretty creepy. But Sue eventually invites David over, tells him to make himself at home. They drink together. And David says, I knew that she was giving herself, not to me, but to that lover who would need to come. And so David is definitely being an asshole here. And they have sex, and David just wants it to be over. And after, Sue asks him to have dinner, but he refuses, and then the chapter abruptly ends. So, our discussion question was, what is the role of the sailor in this chapter? And it's a bit of an open-ended question, and I don't think there's one correct answer for what the sailor symbolically represents. There's a lot wrapped into that moment. But we do know that David is trying to hide his sexuality in public. He tries to pass as straight, as Mark H. puts it. And then he says, but then he exchanges eye contact with the sailor and discovers that he is not hiding as well as he thought. And when the sailor looks at David in disgust, as Gary B. puts it, it's a mirror moment, a Dorian Gray one for David. It's a blazing revelation that his feelings can't be camouflaged. His nature can't be contained. His behavior is the same as that of Jacques, who previously he's been looking down upon this whole time as some old fairy. Rebecca W. added in her email, I think David is feeling very trapped, and he is looking at a younger man and recognizing that he might very well become like Jacques in the future. And I agree with all of these perspectives. I think that David is actually seeing his own same-sex desire in the mirror. It's everything that he's been hoping to hide. And he's realizing that at the end of the day, he is no better than the old fairies he's been referencing as an example of what he is not. And I also think that the connection of the sailor to home is also very important. Don't forget, Baldwin is living in Paris as an outsider. He's living in exile. This is the 1950s. He left America because it was so terribly racist. But America is still home. So maybe the disgust and the cockiness of the sailor is a reminder of how our original homes, America, can be hateful and foreign, meaning that maybe our homes aren't a fixed place. Maybe they are this irrevocable condition. They're a state of mind. And so our assignment for tonight is part 2, chapter 3 of Giovanni's Room. And our discussion question is, what crime, if any, did David commit? Also, if you haven't watched Screaming Queens yet, don't forget to check it out for free on YouTube. I have the link on my website, and we'll be discussing it later this week. And so check out quarantini.lgbt, and don't forget to email me with your responses at quarantini@ericservini.com. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Dr. Eric Servini, and I will see you tomorrow on Quarantini.